Right. Something happened inside Buckingham Palace that nobody was supposed to find out about, and when Britain finally did, it couldn't agree on what it meant. No announcement, no press conference, no live stream, just a closed door, a folder marked Sovereign Access Only, and a king holding a pen over his son's future. Very British way to handle something enormous, isn't it? Quietly, behind closed doors, hope nobody notices. They noticed. Senior courtiers were summoned to the palace without explanation, phones taken at the door, which, if you know anything about how the British establishment operates, means whatever's happening is serious. Charles walked in carrying a folder. William wasn't in the room. That absence was deliberate. Inside the folder, the Royal Continuity Declaration, a formal, legally binding mechanism to begin transferring sovereign responsibilities toward the Prince of Wales. Not symbolic, not ceremonial, a working transfer path, already activated. Charles picked up the pen, sat with it for a moment, then signed his son's life into a different chapter. Meanwhile, William received a message, return to Windsor, immediately. No explanation, classic palace communication that, say everything by saying nothing. Catherine clocked his face the second he read it. Something has happened, he said quietly, folded the note, left. Now, here's where it gets properly interesting. This declaration wasn't just about confirming William as heir, everyone already knew that, cheers. It came with a classified schedule, seen by almost no one, mapping exactly which briefings, state papers and constitutional powers would begin moving toward the future king. One senior courtier who reviewed it reportedly said it was a mechanism capable of accelerating William's transition without public warning. That's not standard royal admin. That's a contingency plan already running in the background. William arrived at Windsor. Charles wasn't behind his desk. He was standing beside the fireplace. If you've ever had a serious conversation with a British parent, you know when they're not sitting down, it's bad. William stayed standing too. Charles told his son that preparation wasn't a prediction of tragedy, it was protection. His voice faltered on the last word, and William, who had spent a lifetime learning to read what the royal family don't say, heard everything his father couldn't finish. The folder Charles handed him was incomplete. Several annexes, sealed, including one detailing conditions under which William could receive expanded authority before becoming sovereign. Charles offered no explanation, just said some truths had to be absorbed in stages. Very regal way of saying, not yet, son, but honestly, that part raises questions. A father protecting his child or a sovereign controlling what the heir was permitted to know? Catherine found William later that evening, alone, still, folder closed beside him. She sat down and waited, because she knows him well enough not to push. He finally said he wasn't frightened of becoming king, he was frightened of the loss that had to come before it. She reached for his hand. He held on longer than usual, and if that doesn't get you right in the chest, honestly, nothing will. But to understand why Charles finally acted, you have to go back to one afternoon at Westminster Abbey and 11 minutes that changed everything. The Commonwealth Service, planned to perfection, immaculate from the outside, very British occasion, all ceremony and precision, and everyone pretending everything is absolutely fine. Except behind the scenes it wasn't. An urgent state communication landed while Charles was temporarily unavailable. Officials needed an immediate response, but no signed authority existed allowing William to read the full message. The future King of England stood in an antechamber, listening to aides row through the door. One aide wanted to give him a summary. Another refused, said even showing William the document without authorization could breach protocol. 11 minutes. Nothing moved. The heir to the throne stood there powerless. In a country that invented bureaucracy, this was bureaucracy eating itself. Charles came back, heard what happened, dismissed the room, kept only William, waited for the door to close, then apologised. A British king apologising to his son. That never happens. That tells you everything about how badly it shook him. That evening, Charles called in the Cabinet Office liaison and constitutional advisers. The first draft arrived carefully worded, the kind of language designed to mean everything and commit to nothing. Very Whitehall, very predictable. Charles rejected it. He wanted stronger language, wider access, a plan that would survive the next crisis. Westminster exposed a gap at the heart of the monarchy. The Declaration was born to close it. And that's not even the most complicated bit. When William discovered what had actually triggered the whole thing, gratitude was nowhere near his first response. Locked room, Windsor, no aides, no witnesses. William placed the Declaration on the table between them. Charles had prepared for concern. He had not prepared for his son's anger. "Did you sign this because the institution needs me or because you believe you may not be able to continue?" Silence. Charles insisted a sovereign couldn't wait for disaster before securing succession. William said a father shouldn't make the most significant decision of his son's life without him in the room. Neither of them was wrong. Both of them were hurting. Very British standoff that. Both men completely right, completely wounded, neither willing to say it plainly. Charles eventually admitted the truth. Westminster had frightened him. For 11 minutes he had imagined the monarchy paralysed, unavailable sovereign, heir forbidden to act, confusion spreading through the institution. He couldn't let it happen again. William opened the sealed pages. The Declaration gave him access to classified sovereign briefings, authority to chair selected state meetings. The transfer wasn't hypothetical anymore. It had already started. But here's what William didn't know yet. Charles hadn't written the strongest provisions alone. Someone had pushed him further, and that someone was not going to be ignored. Princess Anne. Of course it was Princess Anne, the woman who has never in her life softened a message she believed needed delivering. National treasure, absolutely terrifying, completely correct 99% of the time. She walked into Charles's private office with a written timeline of the 11-minute delay. Put it on his desk. Loyalty to William, she told him, requires more than shielding him from fear. It requires preparing him completely. Charles asked whether he thought his instincts as a father had compromised his judgment as kin. Anne didn't raise her voice. She pointed to the timeline. When he pushed it away, she moved it back. Honestly, respect. She had supported the Declaration's strongest clause, that whenever national continuity was at risk, William must receive the same emergency briefing as the sovereign. Full stop, no softening, no exceptions. Even when Charles accused her of forcing the future too close, she didn't budge. Camilla found him later, alone, still holding the timeline. She asked the question he'd been dodging. Are you preparing William for the crown or preparing yourself to let go of it? Charles didn't answer straight away, and that pause, that very telling, very human pause, says more than any official statement ever could. The Declaration was never publicly announced, but the palace started behaving as though it had been. William received briefing boxes previously reserved only for the sovereign. Senior officials quietly rerouted their schedules around his. Meetings once built entirely around Charles began adjusting to include his son. No crown had changed hands, but anyone who'd worked inside those walls for more than a decade knew what a shift in gravity felt like. Camilla walked into a scheduled briefing. William was already seated beside Charles, identical classified folders in front of both men. She recovered quickly, took a seat, said nothing, but the pause had been clocked by everyone in the room. For years, that space had been built around one man's authority. Now it was built around two. William brought that weight home past midnight. Catherine watched him set the red box down. She waited. She always waits. She knows exactly when to speak and when not to. He told her he'd spent hours reviewing decisions that had affect millions of people. He'd thought of authority as duty. He hadn't expected it to feel so isolating. Then a confidential schedule leaked. William would chair an emergency continuity meeting. Charles would attend but would not lead. Courtiers called it a rehearsal. William called it something he needed to talk to his father about, without titles, without folders, without the institution standing between them. They walked through Windsor together. No aides, no agenda, just two men and a lot of unsaid things. William asked what Charles had felt when the Queen began preparing him for kingship. Charles stopped walking. He said guilt had followed every single lesson she gave him. Every briefing prepared him for a future that required her to be gone. Even thinking about it had felt like a betrayal. He'd never said that out loud before, not to anyone, not to his son. William understood instantly. He said every new folder, every private meeting, every added responsibility now felt connected to the possibility of losing his father. He wasn't rejecting duty, he was mourning before there was anything yet to mourn. Charles put a hand on his shoulder. I didn't sign it because I'm expecting to disappear. I signed it because history doesn't wait, and I will not leave you unprotected when it moves. The king had confused secrecy with strength. The son had confused preparation with goodbye. For the first time since the pen hit paper, they were standing on the same side of it. That peace lasted approximately one morning, because before breakfast it was everywhere. Broadcasters pulled their schedules, correspondents scrambled outside the palace gates. A television presenter opened a special bulletin with the line that ricocheted across every group chat in Britain. This is not an abdication, but it is the clearest sign yet that Prince William's future has entered the present. London reacted the way London always reacts to royal news, loudly, immediately, and with completely divided opinions. Some called it responsible and overdue. Others wanted to know why it had been kept secret. Outside the palace, people debated what it meant for a king who was by all accounts still very much on the throne. Charles had wanted stability. Britain received uncertainty instead. Funny how those two things keep ending up in the same sentence when it comes to this family. Camilla watched the coverage and saw William's expression tighten. She told him the strongest answer wasn't a statement, it was standing beside his father and letting the country see what was actually true, not replacement, continuity. That afternoon, a joint appearance was confirmed. Charles entered first. William walked beside, not behind, beside. That single detail landed harder than any press release could have. Before they stepped forward, Charles paused, adjusted William's ceremonial insignia, looked at his son properly. You are ready to learn what no one can learn alone. William held his gaze. Then we do it together. And that was it, really. The declaration wasn't a warning, it wasn't a farewell, it was a father who had waited his entire life to become king, making absolutely certain his son wouldn't face that moment unprepared. The pen hadn't transferred the crown, it had made sure that whenever history demanded the handover, the crown would pass without breaking anything beneath it. Very British solution to an impossibly human problem. Plan for the worst, say very little, stand together when it matters, and hope the country understands what you couldn't bring yourself to say out loud.